Between 1891 and 1923, in the rugged mountains of Idaho, one man built 14 log cabins that were all identical. Each of these shelters was left in perfect condition, as if the owner had stepped out for a moment and never returned. Inside each structure, dinner was cooling on the table, and neatly stacked carpentry tools lay nearby. In over 30 years, no one had ever seen the face of the man who built these strange mountain homes. He had accomplished something utterly impossible, outwitting all the trailblazers of the Wild West. But what actually happened to this mysterious architect? This story has become a true symbol of the fading era of the untamed American West. It weaves together human perseverance, mystical fear, and a mad, almost religious obsession. Today, we will attempt to reconstruct the chronology of those strange events, relying solely on the bare facts. We will follow in the footsteps of a man who defied the entire world and managed to remain undefeated. Get ready. We are about to delve into one of the darkest chapters in the history of the continent's settlement. Today's story comes to us from a viewer named Michael, who lives in Boise, Idaho. He writes, "Dear editor, my great-grandfather's diary, he was a surveyor, has been passed down in our family for over a century. It describes in detail an encounter with one of those very empty cabins, and this incident haunted him for the rest of his life." Well, Michael, thank you so much for this brilliant recommendation and for sharing your family archive. I can say with confidence that your great-grandfather's diary will shed light on events that official archives have kept silent about. So buckle up, folks. We're setting off on a very cold and confusing journey through time. We'll travel back to an era when the Wild West was already on its deathbed, gasping its last breaths. It was a time of great upheaval, when the old laws of survival were rapidly being replaced by strict rules from Washington. The free people of the mountains watched in horror as their boundless world shrank under the onslaught of steel rails. And it was at this turning point that our elusive builder began erecting his silent monuments to freedom slipping away. Our story takes place in 1891 in the Bitterroot Mountains, on the border between Idaho and Montana. In those days, this land still retained the spirit of the true frontier, despite the whistle of a distant locomotive. The era of great mountain hunters and free-spirited trappers was rapidly and irrevocably fading into the past. Huge corporations began laying railroads through sacred lands, scaring away the forest game. The Wild West was dying before the eyes of those who had given it their best years, their blood, and their youth. By all accounts, life here demanded a man of iron will and constant readiness to take risks. The locals were tough, taciturn people, accustomed to solving their problems with the help of a trusty Winchester. They lived in simple wooden houses, subsisting on salted pork, beans, and whatever they managed to shoot in the woods. For farmers of that era, buying a new calico dress for one's wife was considered a true rare celebration. Compared to our times, their way of life seemed unbearably hard, cruel, and extremely austere. It was in this vanishing world that an experienced government forest ranger named Frank Fenn lived and worked. Frank was a tall, wiry man with deep wrinkles on his weather-beaten face and a piercing gaze. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand, having spent most of his adult life in the saddle. At home, his loving wife Mary was always waiting for him. She baked the best cornbread in the entire vast county. On long winter evenings, Frank carved wooden toys out of softwood for his little boys. Fenn loved this rugged land deeply and watched with a heavy heart as noisy civilization rudely encroached upon it. He witnessed greedy loggers mercilessly cutting down groves, leaving behind dead stumps. His job was to map new territories and maintain a fragile order in the assigned area. It was a lonely and dangerous duty, requiring long weeks of isolation far from the warmth of home. But Frank sincerely believed that someone had to protect what remained of pristine nature from complete destruction. In September of that fateful year, Frank received orders to accompany surveyor William Carlin to a remote area. William was a young, educated man from Boston who was completely unprepared for the realities of the frontier. He wore ridiculous city boots, constantly complained about the gnats, and had absolutely no idea how to build a fire. Frank treated him with mild irony, but faithfully did his duty, shielding his city friend from danger. Their task was to mark out the exact route for a new road through a difficult mountain pass. The journey got off to a rough start. Cold autumn rains had washed out the narrow trails, turning them into a slippery mess. The horses kept slipping, and the icy wind chilled the riders to the bone through their soaked coats. William Carlin shivered from the cold and silently cursed the day he agreed to this dreadful assignment. But the old ranger merely drove his horse forward in silence, navigating by the barely visible notches on the tree trunks. They climbed higher and higher into the mountains, where the air grew thin and the silence was absolute. On the fifth day of their journey, they found themselves in a completely unfamiliar gorge that did not appear on any official map. The slopes here were so steep that it seemed impossible for a human or a large animal to be present here at all. A thick fog lay like a heavy blanket over the tops of the fir trees, creating an oppressive atmosphere around the weary travelers. Frank instinctively sensed something was wrong. His years of experience told him that danger lurked in this place. He dismounted, pulled a loaded carbine from his saddlebag, and gestured to William to be as quiet as possible. The daily life of the ordinary settlers below was vastly different from what the rangers had expected to see in such a remote backwater. The people in the valleys hastily built their shacks from crooked planks and clay, seeking shelter from the strong winds. Their yards were littered with manure, rusty horseshoes, and broken wheels awaiting long overdue repairs. In the mountains, however, any sign of human presence was usually limited to a cold campfire and discarded animal bones. Therefore, what soon came into view before Frank and William forever turned their survival logic upside down. They moved slowly through the thick undergrowth, pushing aside heavy cedar branches with their numb hands. The smell of rotting pine needles mingled in the air, with the faint but distinct aroma of fresh wood smoke. William hoped they had found a campsite belonging to friendly hunters where they could warm up and have some tea. But Frank Fenn knew full well that no sane person would venture this far at this time of year. The old ranger took the safety off his gun, preparing for an encounter with a fugitive or a dangerous madman. The wind suddenly blew away the thick fog and the trees parted, revealing a small, perfectly flat clearing. Right in the center of this plateau, hidden from the rest of the world, stood a structure that was striking in its impeccable appearance. It was not just a cabin, it was a true masterpiece of carpentry, rising up amidst pristine wilderness. At that moment, the old ranger and the young surveyor did not yet realize that they were standing on the threshold of a century-old mystery. It was from that very second that the sequence of events began that would forever rob them of their peaceful sleep. It happened exactly on September 14th, 1891, on a cold autumn morning. Before the astonished travelers stood a spacious cabin built from thick, perfectly sanded pine logs. The roof was covered with even layers of cedar shingles, and the seams between the logs were skillfully caulked with clay and moss. "Buddy, have you ever seen vagabonds build palaces in such a remote place?" whispered Carlin, stunned. "It seems to me we've stumbled upon the lair of a very unusual beast," old Frank replied grimly, gripping his rifle tighter. And while William Carlin watched this with his mouth agape, the ranger began to slowly approach the porch. The cabin's windows were covered with thick bull's bladder, through which a dim light from the hearth barely shone. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the massive stone chimney, dissolving into the gray autumn sky. There were no sounds around except for the rustling of the wind in the treetops. It was as if the entire forest had held its breath. Frank climbed the steps, which didn't even creak under his heavy boots, and pushed the heavy door. The door swung open smoothly, revealing a perfectly tidy interior to the astonished men. Inside it was warm and dry, smelling of wood shavings, dried herbs, and some incredibly delicious hot food. On a sturdy workbench in the corner lay expensive tools polished to a shine, German planes, saws, and chisels. Against the opposite wall stood a wide bed, covered with the cleanest of animal hides, not a speck of dust to be seen. Everything looked as though the caring owner had stepped out into the woods for a moment to gather kindling and was about to return. The old ranger's attention was particularly drawn to a massive stone stove built with remarkable precision. On its hot cast-iron surface stood a large sooty pot in which a thick meat stew was quietly bubbling. William, his fear forgotten due to his ravenous hunger, stepped closer and peered into the pot, expecting to see a simple stew. However, simmering inside was an exquisite venison stew with large chunks of wild carrots and exotic rare spices. This aroma was more suited to a restaurant in Boston than to a lonely cabin lost among the rocks. The surveyor took a spoon, scooped up some broth, and with utter astonishment, held it up to the daylight. Large, undissolved crystals of an unusual pink salt were clearly visible on the pieces of tender meat. I must note one specific detail that Carlin later described in detail in his official report. The cabin's owner did not use a salt grinder. The Himalayan salt had been added directly to the finished dish in its entirety. How a forest hermit in those days had come by expensive salt from the other side of the world remained a complete mystery. The men sat in ambush inside the hut until late at night, waiting for the return of the strange gourmet. Frank sat in the darkest corner, a loaded carbine resting on his knees, listening intently to every rustle outside. William paced nervously back and forth across the small room, glancing constantly at the massive door with its sturdy bolt. The temperature outside was dropping, turning the autumn rain into stinging snow that lashed against the wooden roof. But neither that night nor the following morning did the mysterious owner appear in his perfect clearing. At dawn, Fenn decided to thoroughly search the surrounding area for any clues. He walked around the clearing several times, carefully examining the broken branches and the trampled, withered grass. To his utter amazement, the only boot prints leading away from the house ended right at the icy stream. It felt as though the man had simply walked up to the water and vanished into the cold morning air. No horse manure, no discarded trash, absolute cleanliness, uncharacteristic of any living creature. Meanwhile, Carlin continued to examine the interior, making detailed sketches in his notebook. He noticed that all the wooden shelves had been fastened without the use of iron nails. The craftsman had used intricate wooden locks and tenons, fitting the pieces together with incredible precision. In the corner hung a change of clothes, a shirt and warm trousers, clearly tailored for a very large, tall man. But not a single piece of paper, document, or old letter was found in the pockets or on the shelves. Realizing there was no point in staying here any longer, Frank ordered the surveyor to pack up for the return trip. They left everything inside the cabin exactly as they had found it, not even touching the cooled stew on the warm stove. The ranger carefully closed the heavy door behind him, feeling an unpleasant chill run down his spine. It seemed to him that invisible eyes were watching them intently from the thick thickets of black cedar on the hillside. The travelers silently mounted their horses and hurried away from this beautiful but terrifying place. It took them nearly a week of arduous travel through the onset of snowstorms to return to civilization. Upon arriving in town, Frank immediately headed to the sheriff's office to report the strange discovery. The sheriff listened for a long time to the story of the perfect hut, the precious Himalayan salt, and the missing owner, frowning. He recorded the testimony in his log, but refused to send his men into the mountains just as the cold winter was setting in. Thus ended the first act of this drama, which marked the beginning of a legend that would soon sweep across the entire Northwest. Rumors spread faster than the creaking of wagon wheels, carrying the news from farm to farm throughout the county. In saloons where people usually discussed only livestock prices and the weather, the talk was now all about the mysterious architect. Hunters boasted that they too had seen the giant's tracks, though most of them were brazenly lying just to get a drink. Local merchants checked their ledgers, trying to recall who had ordered expensive saws and exotic spices, but none of them could remember a single customer who fit the description of old Frank Fenn. The local community's initial reaction was a mixture of burning curiosity and primal, irrational fear. Farmers' wives began locking their doors more securely at night, scaring disobedient children with tales of a forest hermit. The men, meanwhile, gathered in small groups and set off for the foothills, hoping to find an empty cabin. However, the harsh winter had reliably concealed all approaches to that mysterious ravine under several meters of snow. It was as if nature had a vested interest in protecting the secret of its strange inhabitant from the crude interference of greedy townspeople. The following spring, the situation took a completely unexpected turn, plunging everyone into deep shock. A group of trappers led by old Elias Davidson stumbled upon yet another log cabin. Elias, a man of no small courage, ran into town as pale as a sheet and made his way to the local judge. He swore that the new structure was an exact 100% replica of the cabin Frank had previously described. There was the same perfect log cabin, the same expensive tools on the workbench, and cooling food in a cast iron pot. The authorities could no longer ignore what was happening and dismiss it all as the hallucinations of lonely travelers. An official response followed immediately. The governor ordered an armed detachment to be sent into the mountains. The newspapers picked up on the sensation, dubbing the unknown builder the Ghost of Bitterroot and printing his portraits. Journalists from New York traveled to Idaho to personally interview Fenn and Elias Davidson. The quiet region suddenly found itself at the very center of nationwide attention and unprecedented mass hysteria. Over the next 30 years, right up until 1923, people continued to find these structures. A total of 14 cabins were discovered, scattered across the state's vast mountainous terrain. And each time, the scenario repeated itself with frightening mathematical precision, driving investigators to the brink of a nervous breakdown. Perfect order, first-rate tools, a supply of dry firewood, and the feeling that the owner had just stepped out the door. Not once did anyone spot even a shadow of the builder, nor hear the strike of his heavy axe. Strange additional events began to deepen the mystery, turning it into a true paranormal phenomenon. Hunters complained that their dogs refused to approach the discovered cabins, tucking their tails between their legs and whimpering. The surveyors' compasses began spinning near the structures, baffling even the professionals. Some daredevils who decided to spend the night in the empty houses woke up in the morning to the sound of a door opening. These chilling details spread by word of mouth, leading people to believe in supernatural intervention. The pace of the investigation intensified. Marshals combed the mountains in long chains, using the best search dogs. They would find a hut, set up multi-day ambushes around it, hiding in the snow until they were completely exhausted. But as soon as they left empty-handed, it would turn out months later that the owner had returned and taken some of the tools. It was as if he were playing a cruel game of hide-and-seek with them, reveling in his absolute impunity and superiority. Each new police fiasco only cemented the elusive builder's status as a Wild West legend. But this did not happen because the police of that time were stupid or poorly trained in their craft. It was because their adversary possessed knowledge of the terrain that defied all human logic. He moved through the cliffs and mountain rivers in such a way as to leave no traces that his pursuers could follow. His physical endurance allowed him to work at altitudes where people suffered from a lack of oxygen. He was a true genius of survival, a man who had become one with these harsh mountains. By the early 1920s, the frontier had finally ceased to exist as such. Cars, telephones, and paved roads appeared, forever changing the face of the American continent. The old rangers retired, making way for young clerks in stiff, pressed suits. Yet the mystery of the 14 cabins remained unsolved, looming on the horizon as a reminder of the past. The machinery of the state ground its gears, but it could not chew up a single man with an axe. And so the debates over this matter continued until an event occurred that shook the entire country. In the 23rd year, a patrol stumbled upon the last cabin, located at the highest point of the pass. This structure differed from all the previous ones in one small but incredibly important and frightening detail. The door was wide open, and inside reigned absolute, brutal chaos, uncharacteristic of the architect. Before we find out exactly what the Rangers found inside, we need to take one very important pause. Give your loved ones a sense of absolute safety with a professional kit from Frontier Gear. This lightweight and compact backpack contains everything you need for extreme survival in the wilderness. Click the link in the description below to get a discount on an order for yourself or your loved ones. And believe me, in the mountains, the right gear always separates life from certain, agonizing death. Now let's return to the cold mountains of Idaho and turn to the final darkest page of this story. So, the Rangers stepped over the threshold of the 14th cabin with great caution, their revolvers at the ready. What they saw inside stood in stark contrast to the familiar handiwork of the mysterious mountain craftsman. A massive wooden table lay overturned, and expensive German saws were scattered across the dirty floor. A cast iron pot lay in the corner, its contents dried into a dark, ugly, and frightening stain on the floorboards. For a moment, it seemed as though a struggle with a bear had taken place here. but there were no claw marks anywhere. People familiar with the old buildings were baffled by this sudden outburst of violent destruction. Clearly, something had thrown the unshakable hermit off his usual, mathematically precise balance. The police began to carefully examine every inch of the ransacked room in search of clues or a body. They tapped the walls and floors, hoping to find a hiding place with documents or gold stolen from the bank. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, for everyone understood that the denouement of a 30-year-old drama was near. In the stone oven amid the cold gray ashes, one of the inspectors discovered a half-burned notebook. It had a leather binding, and the pages were filled with small, neat handwriting, blurred in places by moisture. It was the first and only artifact left behind by the ghost of Bitterroot during his years of self-imposed exile. With trembling hands, the officers carefully packed the find into a bag to send it to experts in the city. They hoped that this diary would finally reveal the identity of the man who had built the identical hideouts. Returning to the city with this evidence caused an unprecedented frenzy among the local press and ordinary onlookers. A crowd of reporters besieged the police station, demanding that the contents of the document rescued from the fire be made public. The authorities chose to maintain a strict silence, closing access to the case files for several long weeks. In the lab, experts carefully restored the charred pages, trying to read every word. And what they ultimately translated caused the sheriff to clutch his head in complete, utter bewilderment. The diary contained neither a name nor a date of birth, nor any mention of the author's past life before he retreated to the mountains. Instead, the notebook consisted of an extremely complex diagram interwoven with reflections on the nature of time. The author wrote that he built these cabins not as shelters from the elements, but as nodes in a vast network of preservation. He believed that civilization would inevitably collapse, and his sturdy homes would offer a chance of salvation for the chosen few. The 14 huts were arranged to form a perfect geometric pattern on the map, understandable only to him. Reading these lines evoked in the detectives a sense of deep unease and a sense of encountering a foreign genius. The text was replete with complex mathematical formulas and precise astronomical calculations of the stars' movements. The man who wrote this had clearly received a brilliant education at one of the best universities on the coast. There was only one sentence written there, scrawled in large letters as if in a state of deep panic. "They've found me, and now the network must be erased forever before the contagion gets inside." Who were these "they" from whom the architect was fleeing, and what kind of contagion frightened him more than the harsh winter? The police assumed that the hermit's mind had finally snapped from long, unbearable solitude. It was this very bout of paranoia that drove him to destroy his last refuge and attempt to burn the diary. After the discovery of the 14th cabin, all traces of the Bitterroot ghost vanished forever, as if he had evaporated. No one found any new structures, saw smoke rising above the trees, or heard the sound of an axe. The authorities officially closed the case, attributing it all to a vagrant who had frozen to death in a winter blizzard. And yet, debates about the case continued for a very long time, dividing society into several camps. Over a pint of beer, people put forward the most incredible theories about what had happened, trying to fill in the gaps. Each new theory seemed more fantastical than the last, but none of them could explain all the oddities. The architect's mystery turned into a folk epic, a myth that lives on in the mountains of Idaho to this day. Let's take a look at the most popular theories, which the residents of the Wild West of those years sincerely believed in. The first and most widespread theory held that the builder was a fugitive bank teller from Chicago. People believed he had stolen a huge sum of money and hidden in the mountains to wait out the detectives' search. The expensive tools and rare salt were easily explained by his large supply of cash. Supporters of this theory believed that the 14 cabins were decoys designed to confuse his pursuers. In their view, they from the diary were mercenaries who tracked down the thief and brutally killed him. The second theory was far more mystical and popular among superstitious hunters and Native Americans. They claimed that an ancient forest spirit had settled in the mountains, attempting to mimic the human way of life. The spirit did not understand why houses were needed, but saw the settlers' construction sites and blindly repeated the labor-intensive process. The uniformity of the structures was explained by the fact that the supernatural beings simply lacked human imagination. This tale was perfect for scaring disobedient children before bedtime on winter nights. The third version, supported by the intelligentsia, linked the hermit to government projects. Some believed he was a military engineer who had gone mad after the horrors of the Civil War. He continued to build defensive redoubts, awaiting a non-existent attack by an army of enemy soldiers. His discipline and the quality of his work perfectly matched the profile of a high-class army specialist, and he disappeared because the agency eventually found him and took him to a closed hospital for veterans. But if you really want to know the truth, you should take a look at the archives of the psychiatric hospital. In 1924, shortly after the discovery of the last hut, the police detained a strange vagrant. He was a tall, incredibly strong old man with frostbitten hands who didn't utter a single word. He was wearing clothes sewn from animal skins, and in his coat pocket lay a complex wooden measuring device. He was placed in a clinic where he spent the rest of his days drawing geometric, intricate patterns on the walls. The most astonishing revelation came when the doctor showed the old man a clipping with a photograph of one of the cabins. The man suddenly perked up, grabbed a pencil, and drew an exact floor plan of the interior with dimensions. He unerringly indicated the location of the stove, the workbench, and the number of shelves, none of which had been mentioned in the article. The doctor immediately contacted the sheriff, convinced that he had found the very same ghost of the Bitterroot Mountains. However, the old man suddenly died of severe pneumonia 2 days before the arrival of the investigative team. The man's identity remained unknown. He was buried under an unmarked wooden cross. But before his death, in a feverish delirium, he kept repeating the same frightening, nonsensical phrase. He muttered that the cycle was complete and that 14 castles would securely hold the darkness within the cold mountains. What exactly he was trying to lock away in his perfect huts, no one alive today knows. Perhaps in his fevered mind, these houses were a magical seal protecting the world from something terrible. Perhaps in your family, just as in Michael's, there are old diaries containing the answers to these mysteries. Stories of the Wild West are often hidden in dusty attics, in grandmother's trunks, and in old photo albums. We just need to look closely at the past to hear the voices of those who have long since passed away. We've come a long way from the first mentions in diaries to the revelations in a psychiatric clinic. This story proves once again that reality always turns out to be more complex than any fictional tale. The Wild West was home not only to brave sheriffs and ruthless bandits with heavy revolvers, it was a refuge for broken geniuses, hermits, and people searching for their own path in the darkness. Their silent traces are still hidden beneath the dense canopies of trees across our continent. If, like me, you're captivated by such unsolved mysteries, we have plenty to talk about. Be sure to email me your historical discoveries, local legends, and stories. I read every letter carefully, and perhaps your story will be the basis for the next issue. Thinking back on that meticulous builder from Idaho, I often wonder how many more cabins like that are hidden in the woods. Nature is a master at concealing humanity's secrets, burying them under a thick layer of moss and fallen leaves. Perhaps right now some lone hunter is standing in front of the entrance to the 15th wooden cabin, and if so, I hope he has the good sense to leave everything as it is and simply walk away in silence. Some secrets must remain secrets forever, preserving their dark, primal allure. With that, our investigation into the case of the architect from the Bitterroot Mountains is officially closed. I hope you enjoyed delving into this mystery as much as I did while researching it. Until next time.